Cheers.
To a great week and
To a really good day today.
and a kind of interesting story that we want to talk about that's been in the news recently, and that's the story of Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan,
Yeah.
who have been arrested in Romania and accused of a number of things. And people are really interested in this story, and I thought there were a number of things that were interesting, especially considering a case that we recently worked on.
Yeah. First of all, it's certainly these allegations are extremely serious. There is a base of evidence from social media, including his own website, where I think there's strength with respect to allegations about certain things. Mm-hmm. He hasn't done himself a service by things he's posted or said. So
let's describe who he is first.
Yeah, why don't you give a description? And I just want to say this is a case before the courts in Romania. We're not taking a position one way or the other on it, but there are interesting facts arising from it about human trafficking that we're going to speak about a little bit more.
And also, like, in terms of the actual Tate case, we're only able to access information as it's reported in the media. So
yeah,
we don't have any actual information from the court itself. So so Andrew Tate, he used to be a kickboxer, and then he's now described on his Wikipedia page as an internet personality, which is intriguing to me because there's a lot of hyperbolic material that's out on the internet from him, which makes him look kind of like a Howard Stern kind of character, basically trying to get famous. And he presented himself as a cigar-smoking playboy of some sort.
I think Howard Stern would object to any comparison between him and Andrew Tate because his interviews are interesting and insightful and balanced and appropriate. These aren't.
And
but anyways.
Interestingly, though, like, Tate was banned from a lot of social media platforms, and so he started some academy, and then he has a number of people, hundreds of thousands apparently, who were paying to go to his academy, and then he got those people from the reports in the media, got them to go and take his most controversial clips and put them on TikTok, and TikTok is highly involved in the story and whatever. Put them on TikTok, and he went within the last 8 months from very few clicks to being one of the most Google searched people, actually being above Donald Trump and Kim Kardashian, according to reports, more Googled than them, and that happened in a short time,
which is scary from a certain perspective, given what he's been saying on the number of these.
And now he's been arrested for the charges are
so he's facing essentially what we typically call human trafficking, and they have human trafficking legislation in Romania. So that's where he is. And I think he left, was it the UK or the UK to go to Romania because he felt he would have more liberty to behave the way he wanted to behave there, and it didn't work out so well for him. But in any event, he's charged with a number of very serious allegations of human trafficking, and essentially that it was an organized crime operation.
Organized crime. And he's also accused of rape.
But the organization was with respect to human trafficking on the Loverboy method, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if I can just say this, just so it's always interesting because some of our viewers talk about and come from different jurisdictions. I mean, this is something we enjoy so much. So we're getting comments from people in Australia and Indonesia and so many places, and there's different legal systems. So Romania, just so everybody understands, is a different legal system than Canada and the UK, and different than the United States. It's the civil code system, which originates back from ancient Roman times, and it's based on the Romano-Germanic system. So there's a bunch of codes. There are no jury trials. There's a single trial. There's a trial before a single judge, and often you have prosecutors very heavily involved in the investigation after arrest, making presentations to the court. And in this case, he's detained right now on what we might say is an investigative type of detention, and he just lost an appeal to get out. So it's a different system of justice.
So he was originally detained for 24 hours, and then the prosecutor successfully applied to detain him for another 30 days.
And they're seeking to now extend it, I think,
and
to 180 days.
And he lost his appeal of that,
Yeah. So it's a different system.
And the purpose that they gave was basically because they want to continue their investigation and not have to worry about him either trying to skip the country because he has a number of passports, or him interfering with witnesses that they're trying to...
Yeah, which is something similar in Canada. So, when people are arrested here, they go up for bail. They may not be released from on bail because they could be A, a flight risk, B, influence people, or otherwise thwart the justice. So it's a similar approach, but it's a completely different
No,
system.
I originally took exception to this term, the Loverboy. What is it? Method, the Loverboy method, because it sounds like on the surface this is just, oh, somebody falls in love with you, and if they don't feel satisfied at the end of the relationship, they can accuse you of somehow seducing them. But it's been described about. There's a great article in the Insider, in which TikTokers themselves have actually tried to clarify, the seriousness of this. And when you look at it, Loverboy method doesn't actually do justice to the seriousness of what he's being accused of.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's an apt description, but it doesn't really give justice to what's involved. So, typically this is a situation where there's a misconception generally about human trafficking cases where, generally the public may think this is a person, the particular victim has been abducted from another country or lured, and then they're under extreme coercive situation to perform in the sex industry. Whereas the majority of the cases come under this type of Loverboy method, where an individual, a male, will then befriend an individual, almost groom them, pretend to fall in love with them, have a relationship with them, and then lure them in to work in the sex industry.
And as soon as the person has gotten there, then they're kind of trapped in the situation.
Yeah, could be for a number of reasons.
There's a very interesting quote in this article, actually. And I'm assuming it's got quotation marks around it. I haven't actually seen him say it himself on the video, but he's attributed as having said, "My job was to meet a girl, go on a few dates, sleep with her, test if she's quality, get her to fall in love with me to where she'd do anything I say, and then get her on webcam so we could become rich together."
And we're not sure, let's be careful, because this is just reported in the media, and that may or may not relate to the allegations he's facing in Romania.
Well, he is, I have actually read a little bit of detail so far that what he's charged with is running a webcam center.
Yeah.
In which he bragged online, allegedly, that he was making $600,000 off of 75 girls.
Right, but the particular complainants in Romania still have to be linked to that overall statement, although it can be used as sort of evidence in general about the scheme he was running.
And there's certainly not 75 complainants.
No, there's not.
So, it'll be his duty, basically, in his defense to try and show that this was a legitimate business of some sort.
Well, it depends. I mean, he can take a number of approaches. One, he can say, all this is hyperbole. This was just bullshit. I'm just shooting my mouth off. And these complainants, I aside from their statements, there's no evidence per se with respect to my financial relationship with them. And typically people who are involved with these types of human trafficking operations, there's charges of living off the avails and other related, what we call material benefit from these relationships.
And interestingly, though, like in Canada, there's an exception that if you charge a reasonable standard rate for something, so say you're driving somebody around, but you're charging just a standard taxi rate,
right,
you're not guilty of anything.
So elaborate on that a bit, because it's a good point.
So you can actually assist somebody who's in Canada. They're immune from prosecution for selling their own sexual services. And you can assist them by helping them do their taxes or driving them somewhere, as long as you charge a standard rate. Because of the nature of the activity, you're charging an excessive rate and you're basically taking advantage of the fact that this is some sort of illegal activity or sexual activity, then you're guilty of living off the avails.
Right. So, there can be a number of charges arising from this. But again, what's interesting, and we've had a recent case that we've defended on a human trafficking case, which essentially falls under the Loverboy method. And
the allegation did.
The allegation did. And, we're not going to say anything, but the evidence in our case was pretty thin. And the particular witnesses themselves had their own history of criminal activity, including within that industry. And so in our case, we've argued about something called...
And they had self-interest.
They had self-interest, and we've argued about something called a Vetrovec warning.
Which is the first time I've come across that, actually, because
I'm
it's still learning everything.
It's an interesting thing. It's where the court has to be very cautious about the evidence given by a witness, where they themselves can have a criminal record or otherwise conduct which would bring their character...
Have a personal interest in the outcome of the case.
Yeah, or their conduct that shows the bias or other things. So this is what's interesting about this. So this type of scheme is the more common scheme of human trafficking cases. But you can also have cases built on evidence where, and we're not talking about Mr. Tate himself, we're just talking in general and from what we've seen in our own cases, evidence built on simply a statement of a complainant and some other slim evidence like maybe hotel receipts, but nothing else. In other words, there's no evidence of financial transactions. There's no flow of money. There's no real surveillance of anything.
There's no TikTok
there's no call
videos
logs
of somebody bragging about what they're doing.
Yeah, but there's no call logs. There's no, nothing that you can follow by way of advertising. So it's really an interesting issue that he may have much more evidence against him, although his lawyer is saying there's no evidence other than the complainant's
and he's done a
statements.
number of interviews saying that a lot of the things he says are taken out of context. So, it's possible that we're just reading media reports. So
we don't know. I mean, it's going to play out in the court. Certainly, there's a lot there which is problematic, but we'll leave that aside. But it's interesting because in the age of where people thought this is like an abducted person who is put into basically being a slave in a sex industry, a lot of this follows this type of method, the Loverboy method. Right. But
coercion is more often the case than actual abduction, like being kidnapped. Right?
And sometimes even if I can actually say this without getting in too much trouble, even a lighter form of coercion where something develops, but with consent, with the other person saying, yeah, no, I want to do this.
Originally, but
right.
You have to be able to leave anytime you want to.
Right. And so it's very difficult to draw those lines in defending these cases. And the evidence has to be pretty good about, what are the elements that's establishing the control and the manipulation of the individual. But we have now seen some cases where the evidence is incredibly thin, and you wonder whether somebody's bringing an allegation simply to blame this person to protect somebody else, or simply as a revenge. Mm-hmm. Because the evidence has been so incredibly thin, and it's based on this type of method, which they call the Loverboy method.
I know. And it is kind of interesting in the Tate case, though, that the whole thing from the reports seems to have started because not one of the women complained, but one of the women's boyfriends made a report. So it'd be interesting to see actually how this all pans out.
But that also can stem from the victims themselves not feeling that they have the power or the strength or fearful of coming forward, and that's very much a factor.
There's one other issue which I noticed was taking some interest in terms of the conversations online, and that's that a number of his vehicles were frozen as assets, and so there was a rumor that the vehicles are being used to fund the prosecution against him, and that's totally not the case. So we've had clients before whose assets were frozen. Can you explain why they do that and the effect it has?
So in cases involving drugs or organized crime or human trafficking, the government will try, and the prosecution will try and trace money allegedly from an illegal operation into an asset. Could be a house, could be a car, could be a bank account, could be a post office box with jewelry or something in there. And if they're able to try and draw this trace from one point to another, then they can unilaterally bring a court order to seize those assets, and they seize everything. And it can be very debilitating to an accused to defend themselves, because then they have to apply to free up money for life activities.
No matter how wealthy they are, they might suddenly have access to $0 to fund their defense.
And then they have to bring an application to free up money for their defense, which you can do, but then also money for just simply being able to live. But it's scrutinized by the court, and in our case in Canada, by the Crown's office. So it's a very powerful tool of the prosecution, and it happens often in these organized crime cases or drug cases, but often can be abused in cases where there is very little evidence. And I've been involved in certain cases where the seizure of funds was really without a basis. So it's something that can be ripe for abuse. In his case, I mean, if there's financial transactions, they should be able to trace it. If they can't, it's an issue.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out, actually, and actually getting some solid information on what it is the prosecution. Nobody knows yet what the prosecution's case is based on yet. So,
but you know what? It's going to be interesting to follow it in another jurisdiction. It'll be kind of cool to see how it plays out. And there's another
thing we want to talk about that's kind of connected to this. We'll do that in another episode.
Perfect. Cheers.
Cheers.